Inglourious Basterds is a fantastic film. It is a film that director Quentin Tarantino worked on for 8 years, and boy did it pay off. Thanks to the well-woven and intricate storylines, the colourful and memorable characters, great attention to detail to the film and to the time period as well. There's just so much that this film gets right, I could simply talk about it for ages, but for the purposes of staying focused, I will be focusing on one character in particular, Colonel Hans Landa of the SS. And I'll be asking whether he knows who Shoshana is in the restaurant scene, what makes him such an intelligent character, and whether or not he actually believes in the Nazi ideology. Because if there's one thing that Tarantino excels at, it's creating compelling characters worth talking about. First, a bit of context for the film. Once upon a time in Nazi-occupied France, an Apache resistance group made up of 8 Jewish soldiers led by Lieutenant Aldo Rain have one mission in France as the Americans they are, which is, let's all say it together now,
killing Nazis.
Yes, sir!
Meanwhile, in tandem with their story is the tale of Shoshana Dreyfus, a woman who loses her entire family to the hands of Hans Landa. When her cinema is to hold a Nazi film premiere for the German Reich, she plans to burn down her cinema with the Nazis inside and get her vengeance. So, ladies and gentlemen,
fasten your seatbelts.
Question 1. Does Landa know who Shoshana is in the restaurant scene?
if there's one thing that the opening scene established with the character of Hans Landa, it is that he is fiercely intelligent and loves playing games with people mentally, particularly in this restaurant scene where Shoshana has now taken the alias of Emmanuel Miu, and both characters together discuss the prospect of moving the premiere of the German film Nation's Pride to her cinema. In that same opening scene, he bids Shoshana's family adieu, which means goodbye, but when given the opportunity to shoot her with his Walter pistol, he yells out,
Shoshana!
which means goodbye until we meet again. This immediately gives the viewer the impression that at some point he is going to catch up to this woman, reinforced by Landa being a detective and the subtle dialogue that Tarantino considers poetry. Also the fact that all the names of the Jewish families were recorded in Landa's workbook. I bring this up because in the restaurant scene, Landa displays a number of actions that come off as socially awkward. For example, instead of asking Shoshana to stay behind to talk for a moment when she tries to get out of her seat, like, "Hey lady, could I please talk to you for a moment? Yeah, oh thank you, I just need to talk." He instead pushes her back down on her seat, which seems more like the type of action you would use for interrogation rather than asking to have a conversation. This leads me to my next point. Landa asks her, how is it a young lady like yourself comes to own a cinema? Shoshana talks about how it belonged to her aunt and uncle, and how her aunt died from a fever and how her uncle died during the Blitzkrieg. After Landa expresses some sympathy by saying pity and regrettable, he then awkwardly segues and completely changes the subject into the fact that she has a Negro working for her cinema, who goes by the name of Marcel. What's even more unusual is how he offers her food and cigarettes. Like here for instance, he asks, have you tried the strudel here? With Shoshana responding hesitantly no. He then orders some, while at the same time beginning their conversation. Now this may seem like a way to ease her into a situation she feels anxious in, as Landa puts it.
Ceci est une simple formalité. Aucune raison.
But what gives me the impression that he knows who Shoshana is when he orders her the cream for the strudel, because once her strudel is delivered, she picks up her fork and attempts to eat, before being interrupted by Landa saying,
Attendez la crème.
What's interesting about this is knowing how Jewish culture works. Tarantino cleverly uses the close-up shot of the cream to heighten the tension because for Jewish people like Shoshana, eating cooked dairy products like strudel with raw dairy products like cream is not considered among the Jewish culture kosher, not their way of consuming dairy food. This is something that I'll touch on in a bit, but what all these actions seem to suggest is that he's constantly testing Shoshana, trying to push every single button until she eventually breaks, and to top it all off, even when he may have her, he puts out his German cigarette in the strudel and says goodbye. This fits in very well with the idea where Landa considers himself a hawk compared to a Jew whom he considers to be a rat. And all these actions is Tarantino's way of saying that this character of Landa has her in his claws and is simply playing with his food. Hence the odd choice to put out his cigarette in the strudel. I also think this is why Tarantino chose to set the opening scene in a dairy farmhouse, where Shoshana and her family hide underneath the floorboards from Nazis, and have these particular foods in the restaurant scene because it shows that Shoshana, like many other Jews back in World War II has to abandon her ideals and her culture's way of life in order to survive. The awkward actions, along with the even more awkward attempts at conversation from Landa, are why I believe he knows who Shoshana isn't who she says she is. We, the audience, feel scared and worried for Shoshana as a result of this, and all of this relates to the key themes that Tarantino explores, such as the importance of language and culture, because in World War II and Nazi-occupied areas, your knowledge of both determined whether you lived or died. And even if Tarantino says that he doesn't really know who she is and that was just for effect of the scene, yeah, given that everything that I've deduced, I find that incredibly hard to believe.
Question 2. What makes Landa such an intelligent character?
For this question, I'll be focusing just on the opening scene specifically. Immediately when Landa enters the house after being greeted by Monsieur Lapadite, Lapadite asks if one of his daughters could get him some wine. He instead, however, says, "Milk is what I would prefer." This grabs the viewer's attention, as we can just tell from that one action of asking for a glass of milk instead of wine that this guy is unpredictable. You are left wondering what is his endgame, and the dead silence of the scene helps give it that slight edge. After Landa ticks off the names of the members of Shoshana's family to confirm that Monsieur Lapadite is clear, he then asks for another glass of milk and pushes Lapadite to repeat his nickname that the people of France have given him, the Jew Hunter.
Biggest understatement ever.
He then proceeds to explain to Lapadite,
I understand your trepidation in repeating it. Heydrich apparently hates the moniker the good people of Prague have bestowed on him. Actually, why he would hate the name the hangman's baffling to me. It would appear he's done everything in his power to earn it. I, on the other hand, love my unofficial title, precisely because I've earned it.
This instantly heightens the tension, as it not only shows us how Landa thinks in his mindset, but this tells us how good he is at his job that he's even been given the name of the Jew Hunter, meaning that the chances of Shoshana and her family coming out of this alive are slimmer than slim. Hans Landa makes this very apparent when he says,
The feature that makes me such an effective hunter of the Jews is, as opposed to most German soldiers, I can think like a Jew, where they can only think like a German. More precisely, a German soldier.
What's interesting is the fact that when he says that, he starts drinking his milk again, and this is interesting because, as I stated before, Jewish people consume dairy products separately. It's not kosher to have cooked and raw dairy food together, and Landa understands this, which is why he drinks the milk when he says, I can think like a Jew, and is also another reason why I believe he knows who Shoshana is in the restaurant scene, because instead of asking what Shoshana would like to drink, he just orders her a glass of milk without so much as asking her. Tarantino wanted the character of Landa to be someone who thinks outside the box and has a wide knowledge of language and culture, for example speaking French, German and even Italian, and understands the rules in which language and culture operate, like the idea of kosher and even hearing the oddness of Aldo Rain's Italian accent when the bastards pretend to be Italian.
Sì, corretto.
In answering this question and reflecting on this scene, I think what makes Landa such an intelligent character is how he loves to toy with people mentally.
Another great example of this would be when he asks Monsieur Lapadite, who speaks French, if he can switch to English, considering both of them speak the language English. But that is odd, because he seemed to be speaking French perfectly fine before he said he didn't wish to continue to speak it so inadequately. What I really believe is that he switched to English so that in case there were Jews being sheltered, they wouldn't know what he was saying. And this very nature is what I think makes him so intelligent. Another thing to add is how he pulls out his smoking pipe, which is enormous, when Lapadite is smoking his own pipe. This not only creates a mine is bigger than yours undercurrent, but it can also be interpreted as a Sherlock Holmes reference, who like Landa is a smart detective. And this would also make sense given the numerous references the film makes to things like King Kong, Riefenstahl, and Lillian Harvey. King Kong being Hitler's supposed favourite film, Riefenstahl being a famous German propaganda director, and Lillian Harvey being a former lover of Minister of Propaganda Dr. Joseph Goebbels.
Question 3. Does Landa actually believe in the Nazi ideology?
Interestingly, I believe that despite how evil his actions are, and how Nazi-like they may appear, I don't think he really believes in the Nazi ideology. No, whoa, hold on. Guys, come on. I'm going to explain right now, and I'm going to use the ending scene to illustrate my point.
Now, one could argue that he does, considering that in the opening scene he compares German people to hawks as being very cunning and predatory.
Now, if one were to determine what attribute the German people share with a beast, it would be the cunning and the predatory instinct of a hawk.
And comparing Jews to rats as being vile and repulsive. And maybe this is true considering that the hawk is a symbol used alongside the swastika symbol to represent Nazi intelligence. However, I see Landa more as a character that just wants to be on the winning side and use the Nazi ideology to his benefit in order to stay alive. I say this because prior to the ending scene where he surrenders himself over to Aldo Rain, he makes a deal with Rain about ending the war
Tonight?
and talking to Rain's commanding officer about being remembered as a hero in the attempt to assassinate Adolf Hitler, Operation Kino, and other Nazi leaders of the German Reich. This means that he will get to live on a home on Nantucket Island and get off scot-free. Not only that, but to further cement this, around this time the film is set, in 1945, Germany was losing the war and there was no two ways around it. With those two things in mind, once Landa discovers the dynamite intended for killing Hitler that the bastards were going to use, what he does is place the dynamite under the seats of both Hitler and Goebbels so that he can be viewed as the good guy by the winning Americans. That doesn't sound like a colonel who holds true to his leader or the Nazi ideology. I think Tarantino deliberately did this so that throughout the whole movie, you think he embodies the principles and morals of a Nazi, but instead pulls the rug out from under you and adds more dimension to the character of Landa. And we, the audience, are left so surprised and, in a lot of ways, feel even more disgusted by this character, which is why Tarantino's use of graphic violence of seeing Landa getting a Nazi swastika carved into his head in the ending scene is so immensely satisfying. And if you're still on the fence about my perspective, let me ask you this. Why would he not kill Shoshana when he had the chance? Why would he let her go when he has the chance again in the restaurant scene? And why, of all things, would he betray his leader and try to become known as a member of Operation Kino? The answer is that he simply finds enjoyment in causing other people pain and toying with people no matter what side he's on.
Bingo!
And in a lot of respects makes him something even more maniacal and horrible than a Nazi, but an absolute sociopath who enjoys doing things that Nazis do. His poetic justice is deserving because while he may not believe in the Nazi ideology, it does not excuse what he's done in the least.
So to sum up, I genuinely believe that Hans Landa knows the true identity of Shoshana, and his enjoyment in toying with people like Shoshana is what I think makes him so clever. And yet I still don't think he believes in the Nazi ideology. I know, shocker right. But, on a serious note, the film was incredibly effective at showing how there are bad people out there in the world who will use government systems to their benefits in order to get what they want, which is a problem with politics that Tarantino very smartly addresses through the character of Hans Landa, and how we should not use someone's culture in order to get the better of them. What I take away from these key scenes in the film, in analysing the film, is that humanity in the past have done some horrible things to one another, like slavery with black people in the United States, the Aboriginal people of Australia, and the slaughter of millions upon millions of Jews, who were all just regular human beings who didn't deserve to be beaten, tortured, or executed. And while we certainly can't undo the mistakes of the past, we can most certainly make things way better than what they were. Thank you all so much for watching this video, and if you like this video, please hit the like button, please subscribe, and I want to say a quick thank you to the 3E and V class that I made this project for. You guys have been the most awesome people that I've ever had for a class ever. And thank you so much to Ms. Keiston. You have been so supportive throughout this entire thing, and without you, I don't even think I would have even gotten this far. So thank you very much. Peace out.
You know something, 3E and V class?
I think this just might be my masterpiece.